And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Banner Monday, where we kick off each week by doing what IU fans love more than anything else, talking hoops. This is the 20th edition of Banner Monday, and it is our 500th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the afternoon of Monday, March 18th, 2019.
That can't be true.
I'm your host. What'd you say?
So that can't be true. We've done this 500 times.
500 episodes. Yes, we have. All right, let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call, how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud Banner moment. And we just endured our third straight selection Sunday in which the Hoosiers did not hear their name called when the NCAA tournament bracket was revealed. Clearly, that was the anti-banner moment of the week, and there's really no way to sugarcoat it as anything other than a massive and unacceptable disappointment. Given the resources, the recruiting base, and the tradition of Indiana basketball, there is no good excuse for this program having two stretches over the course of a decade in which it misses three straight NCAA tournaments. Yet here we are. The Hoosiers missed the tournament each season from 2009 to 2011 and have now missed it each season from 2017 through 2019. Add in 2014, and the Hoosiers have made just 4 of the last 11 NCAA tournaments. Since 2004, Indiana has played in just 7 of the last 16 NCAA tournaments. This is what we've become. This is what we are, at least right now, a program that for the better part of the last 2 decades is more likely to miss the NCAA tournament than make it. When I was a kid, out in the driveway, pretending to be Jay Edwards and Calbert Chaney and Brian Evans, if you had told me this is what Indiana basketball would one day become, I'd never have believed you. With all that said, this segment is the banner moment, and that means it's my job to find something positive to grasp onto, even on this most depressing of March Mondays. And here's what I've got. It's not much, but I do believe that it's something. As disappointing as a spot in the NIT is, even with a number 1 seed to soften the blow, the fact is that it does represent some progress over the previous 2 seasons. It's not nearly enough progress. It's not the progress we all reasonably expected, but it's something. In 2017, we chose to run with our tail between our legs to Georgia Tech because we were too chicken blank to host an NIT game. Last season, even being 500 in the Big Ten didn't get us so much as an NIT berth. This year, even though we didn't make the NCAA tournament, we were at least in the discussion, and we earned a berth in the NIT, so we'll at least get some postseason tournament play. It's progress. Maddeningly and glacially slow, but progress nonetheless. And while legitimate questions abound about how this program can dream of being better next season while replacing its 2 top scorers, those are questions for the offseason, and we'll spend lots of time on them. For now, I'll just focus on the NIT and take the smallest bit of solace in the fact that we at least took a tiny step forward this season. Like I said, it's not much, but right now, it's about all we've got. All right, joining me, you already heard his voice for today's mailbag. He is back. He won't be here for the NIT shows. He's shutting it down. He just can't possibly jeopardize his future to do NIT postgame shows.
That's not true. If they go far enough, I'll be back.
I know. I had to go there.
I know.
It's Ryan Phillips. What are your opening statements?
Well, you're all sunshine and rainbows today.
I mean, I feel like that's about as sunshine and rainbow as you could be right now.
Completely fair. And I posted it last night. Do I think Indiana right now, the way they're playing, could beat a lot of the teams that got in sort of on the bubble ahead of them, like Arizona State, St. John's, Belmont? Yeah, I think Indiana could beat those teams, but flat out, Indiana didn't do enough to earn it. So there's no complaints. I mean, it's you can stack up resumes and say they played in the toughest conference in the country by far, but they didn't do enough. They just didn't. And the sad part is if they win one of those other games, they get in. There's no question about that. They win one more game this season, wherever. If it was the Arkansas tip-in, doesn't go a millimeter the other way, and they don't call that awful foul on Deron Davis, they're in. If Northwestern, if a guy who made 6 out of 7 threes against them doesn't do that day, and then, by the way, didn't really make many shots the rest of the season, doesn't do that day, they're in. I mean, there's so many what-ifs with this team, but I think that the point of this season has to be, whether you're complaining about them getting in or not, is you can't put yourself in that situation. You can't put yourself in a situation where you're saying what if about one game here, one game there. The body of your season has to be better than that. And I think we all knew that. I mean, I think Indiana fans for the most part all knew that. This was a struggle this season. And there were, we've gone over it a bunch, and people blame the coaches. People blame the players for not trying all this. There's a million reasons why this season went the way it did, specifically when it did, and it went downhill in that losing 12 out of 13. There's a million reasons for that. I would say injuries had a lot to do with it. I would say that, some coaching decisions had a lot to do with it. And I would say some of the guys not really being fully bought in under a new coach had a lot to do with it. Now, do you blame the players or the coach for that? That's a chicken and egg thing to me. But I think that there are a lot of reasons this season went off the rails. What I would say to people out there who are worried about the state of Indiana basketball, and I am too. I mean, missing the tournament 3 years in a row is unforgivable. It really is. But what I would say about people who are worried about the direction of Indiana basketball is I would say, really, I know this sucks to hear it, but it's not about now that it's happened and this has happened. It's not about how they got here. It's about how they respond to it. Does this team come out? Does this coaching staff come out in the NIT and look at it as, okay, this is an opportunity to do something. It's an opportunity to get these young guys a lot of playing time. It's more practice time. It's a chance to sort of build momentum for next year. And you could say, I saw somebody on Twitter saying the NIT is a losers tournament and all this stuff. It's like, oh, shut up. It's for the teams that were on the bubble that didn't get in for whatever reason. Indiana was firmly in the mix. I think more than a lot of people expected. They were in the first 4 out. I mean, some of the high level bracketologists all thought Indiana was right there. I think a lot of the fan base said there's no way they're getting in. And they were clearly right there in the mix with everybody who got in on the bubble. So I would say, look, it's not where we want to be. It's not where the players want to be. It's not where the coaches want to be. But it's a chance to do some damage. It's a chance to win some games. It's a chance to continue to play together. It's a chance to see Romeo Langford play more in college. And see Juwan Morgan play a few more games. I would say it really what should be a determining factor for you is how does this team come out on Tuesday night? Do they come out looking at this as an opportunity and attacking and being focused and being into this? If so, I feel better about this season and I feel better about the direction of the program. If they mail it in, then I'm going to start talking about some concerns because this is an opportunity for these guys. And it's an opportunity for guys like Rob Finney specifically. It's an opportunity for a guy like Devontae Green to show some leadership, a guy like Deron Davis to get out there and play more. A guy like Race Thompson to get on the floor and play more. A guy, some of these backup guys, Jake Forrester, whoever else, to get out there and mix it up and get some more experience. And they should look at that and be excited about that. A guy like Zach McRoberts to get out there and do some more Zach McRoberts things. These are chances for these guys to do something. And if you ask, somebody asked me once, it's like, would you rather barely get into the NCAA tournament or win the NIT to end your season and barely get into the NCAA tournament and lose in a play-in game or go win the NIT? I'd say win the NIT because you want to get into the NCAA tournament, but if you're out in one round, now again, the balance of lose a play-in game or lose in the first round or second round of the NIT, obviously you take the NCAA tournament, but if you can win something and build on that and, do some damage there, I think that's a positive development. Get to play at Madison Square Garden. Some of those things, I mean, that's a positive development for the program. So we're not where we want to be. Nobody is. This isn't a sunshine and rainbows, as I said, show. But at the same time, there is an opportunity to do something here and do something positive and build towards next year when you're going to have a group of different players in there. And as I've said since before the season started, I thought next year would be better than this year, and I still believe that.
All right, on tap, we'll obviously answer your questions here the rest of this segment. I'm fairly certain Mike DeCourcy will be here. I haven't heard from him today, but he's always very reliable, so I'm pretty sure that he will be here. And then I'll take a look ahead to Indiana's game against St. Francis, which is coming up tomorrow. So let's hop into some of these questions. Ryan, you mentioned it's a chance to see Romeo Langford play. Romeo Langford said after the Ohio State game that if Indiana didn't make the NCAA tournament and was selected for the NIT, that he would play. Archie Miller had a media availability today, and that is still the plan, but Romeo is dealing with some back issues. He tweaked his back in the Ohio State game.
And you could see it in the game. He pulled up a little.
Yeah, and so, the basic sentiment from Archie is that, Romeo is not shutting anything down, but he is day-to-day with his back. So we don't know yet if he will play. Sounds like it'll be a game-time decision. The question that we got from Wes, Brian, is would you understand if Romeo opted not to play? Not saying he would opt out, but would you understand? Obviously, an injury changes it a little bit. That changes the dynamic, but how do you generally feel about that when he's projected still as a lottery pick or at least a first-round pick?
If he's a top 10 pick, I get it. I'm not saying I would. I'm not saying anybody should do this or whatever, but I understand it. You're protecting your value, and I get it. And Arkansas, it just got announced today at Arkansas Star. I forget his name off the top of my head, but
Daniel Gafford.
yeah, Gafford, he's going to sit out. And I get that. I understand that. But does is that what I would recommend? Is that what I would do? No, because I think the NBA also wants to see you be competitive, but you're protecting yourself against an injury. That's all. It's not I'm checking out to go work out and focus on the NBA. You're protecting yourself against an injury, and that's protecting your value. And look, when you're talking about millions of dollars, I get it. You protect yourself. And I was one of those people who, when Zion Williamson hurt his knee, said, look, if he sits out, I get it. He's going to be a top 3 pick. He's got to protect his value. If his knee, if there's a possibility of him re-injuring it or it getting worse, he needs to sit down and worry about his family. I agree with all of that. That said, it's encouraging to see Romeo Langford wants to play. And I did see him grab his back a little bit in the Ohio State game. That was concerning. And yeah, I think he especially should monitor that and take care of himself, because again, look, we knew we were going to get Romeo for 1 year. You knew his goal was to be a lottery pick, a top 10 pick. And, he that's life-changing money. That's a life-changing situation. And he needs to protect that at all costs. I agree. I think most of the people within the program would agree with that as well. I think Archie would agree with that, but they want him to play. Obviously, if he's healthy and he wants to play and he's gung-ho about it, then boom, we're not going to argue you against it. But if you checked out at this point to protect yourself, I understand, because we're talking about millions of dollars here. We're not talking about, going to play in Poland or something. This is millions of dollars in life-changing money. So of course you've got to always be mindful of that.
Yeah, I agree. I would understand, but I would also understand.
I wouldn't be happy about it, but I get
it.
Right.
And I would certainly. I suppose there's a part of me that would respect him more and appreciate it more if he did play. That's just natural. But I would understand it, and I certainly don't think it's a thing where, like, you have to do this, that, or the other. Like, it's his choice, and if he wants to be there for his teammates, he wants to play. I would say when it comes to an injury, I would kind of treat it as if we're in November, where it's like, you wouldn't really, you wouldn't risk anything further. Yeah, you wouldn't force it out there like you might if it's like a game to win the Big Ten title.
And
like I would get that
sure.
kind of sliding scale on how you would deal with an injury.
Well, and we might get a situation where he doesn't play in the first game and plays in the second game. His back's bothering him, and you have to understand that. You know, I mean, it's also comes down to effectiveness. How effective can he be with a back injury? We've taught, and again, it sounds like it's just a strain. It's not anything major. It's not a disc problem or anything like that. But is he able to get warmed up? Is he able to get stretched out? Is he able to get it going? And are there spasms, things like that? And so look, Indiana's got to figure out a way to play without him if they can't. And again, if he's injured, Romeo said he's going to play. So if he sits out, it's because of the injury, not because he's shutting it down for the NCAA for the NBA.
All right, question from Jeff. What are the chances one or more players will transfer out of the program, and who would be the most likely candidates? So we are not going to speculate on names, obviously.
And by the way, we never speculate on transfers. We never do.
No, but it is perfectly fair to speculate about the bigger question of will there be transfers? And as we've said all along, number one, it's very common in college basketball. Even at the most stable of programs, they have transfers.
Yes.
And it's especially common after poor seasons and when when you have a new coach that is with guys that he didn't recruit. So we're not going to name names. Here's what I would say. Tell me if you agree with this, Ryan, is if you're kind of looking at the profile for the type of guy that might transfer, like what causes players to transfer at any school? Dissatisfaction with their role. Maybe they went to a school that's far away from home. Maybe they don't see eye to eye with the coach, especially if they weren't recruited by that coach. If you see, so if you're trying to look at who are the most likely candidates, if you find guys who fit one or more of those characteristics and maybe others, then they would probably be the betting favorites, but that doesn't mean that, that you would necessarily want to pinpoint and say any one guy is more likely, but that those types of guys would fit the profile for who might transfer.
Okay. Number one is going to be playing time. That's number one is playing time. Guys don't go to college to sit on the bench. So playing time is number one. 2, system fit. 3, just personality clash with the coaches. And I'd say 4 is if you came in to play for a different coach, maybe you gave it a shot with the new one and it just doesn't work out. We saw that with Curtis Jones last year. He came in and what he was doing for Archie just they didn't line up together. So I would say that is the big deal. Now, the other factor we've got to look at when we're thinking of transfers is transfers coming in. And a lot of people I have talked to and have heard whispers about think there are going to be at least one transfer coming in. And there's a specific type of player that Indiana is looking at. And I'll give you one guess, Jared, what that is.
A shooter.
There you go. You got it, buddy. I would say a shooter and a big man, if you're going to get a transfer, would be the two. If you're going to get more than one, I would say that, and not even a starting big man, like a guy who can come in and play defense if Deron Davis gets hurt or Trace Jackson Davis gets in foul trouble like all freshmen do. There's certain balances there. I do think there will be transfers out. I don't think we will have any major transfers out. I don't think there will be anybody who you say, oh man, we really needed him and he leaves. I don't think that'll happen. But I think there will be movement. And I think that, again, in college basketball these days, with the transfer portal, with guys being able to like go into the transfer portal, explore opportunities, you're basically become a recruit again, and then you can come back. I think that you'll see several guys, at least more than one guy, explore that at least. And I think you'll see some transfers. And I think mostly it'll be minutes and system fit. I think those are the two big ones.
Yeah, I would be surprised if there weren't at least one transfer out and at least one transfer in. I would not be shocked if there were more than 2 transfers out and more than 2 transfers
Where's Indiana
in.
at with the scholarships? With 2 coming in, 2
we
going.
We have 1 right now. Assuming Romeo leaves, then there's
Romeo and Juwan are
there's
gone.
There's 1 open, and Fitzner's gone.
I forgot about Fitzner.
And Zach wasn't on scholarship. So
3 gone, assuming Romeo leaves. You got 2 coming in, so you have 1 open.
One open right now. Yeah, so if someone decides to transfer, then you'd have 2 open and on down the line.
So, but yeah, I would look for, if Indiana's going to go out on the market, they're going to look for a shooter. And I think there are some pretty there's some guys who are able to market that skill on the transfer market who would be very interested in Indiana.
Anybody, bring your shooters. We need shooting. Come to Bloomington. Okay, this question from Sally. I'm seeing a lot of comments and posts about the schedule being too tough this year, that had we had an easier schedule, we would have a better record and would be in the NCAA tournament. I don't get this because we did great until the conference season started. It seems to me had we won the games we should have, Northwestern, Nebraska, we would have been fine. So I want to address this on 2 levels. The first level is the exact level that Archie Miller addressed it today. He said, our scheduling wasn't the problem. Winning the games we needed to win was our problem. He's exactly right. This schedule was not too tough for Indiana to navigate, if they did the things that they needed to do to make the NCAA tournament. Where that discussion is coming in is about how the selection committee looked at resumes.
How much your schedule meant.
Right, and what hypothetically could have changed. Like, legitimately, you were talking earlier about things that could have been different. If there was no Big Ten tournament and Indiana ended the season at 17-14 without a 15th loss, they might have made the tournament.
If there wasn't a 20-game Big Ten schedule.
Because,
if Indiana gets 2 easy bye games against 200-level teams and has 2 more wins,
so that's why that conversation is happening. It's a reaction to what the selection committee said, but it's also important, and we talked about this on our Selection Sunday special last night, it's important not to knee-jerk react to that.
No.
Because sometimes the committee has placed a premium on the schedule and who you played, and even if you had more losses, that wasn't as big of a deal. This selection committee just did it a little bit differently. So that schedule talk is not about something Indiana, necessarily should have done differently. It's just, in hindsight, if we just figured out how to only have 13 losses, we would have made the tournament with all else being equal. That's why people are having that conversation. So, and it doesn't sound like Archie, Archie is a smart, methodical guy. He'll take that into consideration as they're putting together next year's schedule. But I think he's exactly right when it comes to, given all of that, Indiana still just needed to navigate its own schedule better, win the games it could have won, and it would have been in the NCAA tournament no matter what. And that's what you need. You need to create an NCAA tournament resume that is immune to the whims of the selection committee. You put yourself on the bubble, you get what you deserve, and that's whatever the selection committee decides to reward. So it's out of your hands at that point.
I think that's a fair assessment, and I think that it's fair to also look at to look at the fact that, yeah, this year changed with the Big Ten schedule. And I mentioned that before. And having 20 games, if you take 2 of those away and you give Indiana 2 out of conference games, now they'd be playing weak teams, but it seemed like the committee really valued the number of losses negatively. And if you had a lot of losses, didn't matter who you played, you had a lot of losses, you're out. And that's fair enough. I don't, I don't think, again, we're not sitting here as Indiana fans. We have no right to sit here and complain. It's just questioning the methodology and what Indiana needs to do in the future to sort of get in there. But again, if you play the right way, you shouldn't be on the bubble anyway, if you're Indiana. I mean, quite frankly. So I really think that it's splitting hairs at this point. The goal is to never be on the bubble anyway.
Exactly. This question comes from John. Did Coach Miller pull all the right strings and get every player ready to compete in every game this year? Was Archie tough enough, or did all the injuries leave him without weapons? This has been a subject that we've talked about a lot at different points in the season. I feel like it's something that we'll probably reflect on a lot in the offseason. And I get the feeling, and this is totally just kind of parsing some public comments, that Archie maybe feels like he could have done something a little bit differently in this regard. You know, when he kind of reflected on how you first started to see some slippage in that Nebraska game, but we didn't hear about the drastic changes talk until the Minnesota game.
Right.
Now, what that coincided with, of course, was getting a more full bench. And my hypothesis here, and get your take on it, is that, you know, Archie was so concerned with winning every individual game that more so this year than last year, he was willing to overlook some things and keep guys in games with the feeling of, I think, let's keep our better players out there, keep the most talented guys out there so we can win this game. And unfortunately, not only did we lose, it allowed some bad habits to fester.
Agreed.
That kind of built on themselves. After the Minnesota game, when he was finally fed up enough and the injuries weren't as much of a concern, you could use the bench more for guys like Justin Smith and Devontae Green, and it seemed to have some positive impact there at the end. Now, if he had done it earlier, does it have a big impact? We'll never know, but I kind of wonder if he even questions that a little bit just based on some of the comments he's made. I know I do. I would love to see what the season would look like if he had done what it felt like he did more of his first year, which was draw a more hard line with that stuff. But this year, he didn't, maybe because of the pressure to win with Romeo Langford. Who knows why? But it'll be interesting to see how he responds to that in the seasons to come.
Yeah, I think that it's a learning experience for Archie, especially handling this kind of talent, which he hasn't really before, and how to, balance certain things, especially with a younger roster. This was a very young team. People forget that because Juwan Morgan was a senior, and Zach McRoberts was an effective player early in this. Was thought to be an effective player coming into the year as a senior, and people, look at Devontae Green and say he's a junior. But if you look at this roster top to bottom, it's an extremely young roster, and that needs to be something that he develops his ability to deal with a young roster and how he plays them out and how he parses out those minutes and how he, deals with guys who maybe aren't having their best game. Sometimes you just don't have your best game and your best spot on the floor is on the bench. And it's, that happens to guys. It happened to Justin Smith a few times this year where no, he was most effective sitting down and other guys too, but he's a guy who jumps out at me. During that losing streak is really not playing up to his potential. And sometimes that's less punitive you're not playing while sit on the bench. Sometimes it's, hey, sit here and watch the game for a bit from another angle and see if you can figure something out that maybe, opens up your eyes to the way to play right and the way you should be attacking. I think that the encouraging thing from Archie is that when he said there was going to be drastic changes and there were going to be those tweaks to what they were doing, it worked. They lost 2 close games and then they won 4 in a row. And that has to be, when you think about, okay, he was willing to alter what he was doing. And in the past with certain coaches that have been here, they would not alter their approach no matter what was going on. He altered his approach and we saw results, and we saw distinctive results. I mean, the offense completely changed over those last 4 wins. The team was more loose. They attacked more. You saw him trusting Rob Finney a lot more because obviously Finney was getting back to 100%. But there were some significant changes that we saw and that you could see on the floor, not just in practice.
Yep. You have time for one more?
Yeah, one more's fine.
Okay. Let's see. We got this question about who's up next in recruiting with Keon Brooks going elsewhere. We kind of already addressed this. Any good outside shooting grad transfers or impact recruits out there? I mean, we're looking at Harlan Beverly. You've got guys like Lester Quinones, Trey Mitchell. Indiana is in his final six. Those are the guys in the class of 29. There's going to be a lot of grad transfers. So we have to wait and see on those. Indiana doesn't appear to be the leader for any of the guys in the class of 2019, but
Beverly is
we'll
a
see.
big fan of what he saw when he was on his was it official visit? I think it was when we were there.
Yeah,
He was a big fan of what he saw. I don't know if that's going to be enough to pull him away from other
yeah.
schools. But he is a big fan of what he's seen lately. I think he was one of those guys who was hoping Keon Brooks wouldn't commit, so there would be a spot for him. That said, Indiana might wait for the transfer portal to open and say maybe we can get more from a transfer than another young guy, because it's going to be, again, a very young team next year, and they also want to have scholarships open for 2020 as well.
Yep. Okay, so let's end with this one. This is from Aaron. He says, Archie seems to be really good at picking teams up off the mat. Both seasons he's been here, when teams have looked lost, he's more or less turned things around between the decent Big Ten slate last season after horrible non-conference and the 4-game win streak this year when all looked lost. Which is true, although it took a little while for that to happen this year. So we were on the mat for quite a few weeks there. But he said, within games, the team never seems to quit when they get down big. Other than 2015-16, it seemed that when Tom Crean lost a team or they faced adversity, they folded. But with Archie, they can correct it and repoint the compass in the right direction for the most part. I think there's some truth there. It's an oversimplification, I think.
Yes.
There's a nugget of truth there, I think, and he wants to know, why is this? I have my reasons. What do you think?
Well, I think that Archie, as a player, that's the kind of guy he was a fighter. And he was, because you could say that about Tom Crean, but Tom Crean's teams played phenomenally when they were underdogs, almost always. And so there was that bulldog mentality where they were just not going to be pushed around by teams they were supposed to lose to. The problem was they lost to teams they were even with or should have beaten a lot. I think with Archie, it's just an attitude and a style, and he's very gruff and up front with guys, and he's very forward with them. And when things go badly, he's going to tell them why they're going bad. He's not going to sugarcoat things. And I think that helps guys sort of understand there's not going to be flowery language. There's not going to be, philosophical. You're not going to hear him waxing about philosophy. He's going to tell you exactly what's wrong and exactly how to fix it. And I just think that that's what you get with a guy like him. And I also think he's willing to change his methods to get different results if things aren't going well. And I think what we're going to see from Archie long-term as a coach, because by the way, he's not going anywhere anytime soon. You talk to anybody in that program, they're on Archie for a long time. They think he is the guy to take Indiana back. And regardless of the results this year and last year, they think he's the guy, and they think that he's building something special. What I will say is that I think that he needs to identify those problems quicker. I think you hit something on the head when you said that he was so worried about winning individual games that he wasn't building something, and it kind of got away from him at one point this season. He's also a guy who's going to learn from that, and he's going to look at every element of this season. And he's as disappointed this team isn't in the NCAA tournament as anybody. Trust me on that. So I think that's what I see. I see a guy who's willing to change and willing to be, kind of work within. He has a system and he wants to stick to the system, but he's willing to sort of, find what works and take out what doesn't.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain look. I mean, comparing the two regimes, is only going to really go on, I think, for so long. It's still somewhat relevant because you've got the overlap of players and it's still fresh in the mind. You have to remember that the two programs were kind of built on different ideals and on different foundations, whereas Archie's is very much about being defensive-minded and tough-minded, and Tom Crean's was very much offense-oriented and in a lot of ways driven by how well the team was shooting the three-pointer. Now, that's how a lot of basketball is played these days.
Yep.
But, so again, I think the premise of the question is a little bit flawed only because of what we saw from Archie this year. I mean, the team was on the mat for a long time. But I do think as we move forward, and I think we saw it some last year, and I think this is part of why they were able to get up off the mat in late February, was that defensive identity allowed them to have some consistent play, long enough until the offense kind of got going to start winning. Because you saw the seeds of the improvement before they actually started winning the games.
Yeah.
It was like, damn, like we played hard enough to win this game. Our offense was just awful.
Yep.
And like you need both. Don't get me wrong. Like you cannot have an elite, even a good program if you're just going to be all one-sided. So the offense clearly has to be better. But, the identity on defense, I think that's more fully installed now after this year. It'll be more after years 3 and 4. But at that point, Archie, I think, will also be able to put more emphasis on offense. A lot of these pack line programs, you see the first couple of years, the defense improves greatly, the offense stagnates or gets worse, and then it catches up years 3, 4, and 5. And I think that's because you have to emphasize the defense so much early, especially if you're turning the culture around.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair.
Yeah, and I think that's what's always going to be this program's rudder under Archie Miller, unless he drastically changes his approach, which I don't think
Let's also remember that last Tom Crean team that really turned itself around was a veteran team. There was a lot of guys on that roster who played a lot of minutes, and they helped along with that process. And Archie has a very young team this year, and it took a long time for anyone to step up and help with that process of turning the season around.
Yep. Absolutely. All right, so you are not going to be there with us tomorrow night. If Indiana
Sadly,
can
no.
get past, Indiana can get past the first week of NIT play, though, you will be back for some post-game shows.
What time is tip-off tomorrow night?
7:00 Eastern.
Yeah, I will be in the air somewhere over Ohio, I think.
Nice.
Heading to New York. So, yeah, it's a work thing. I'm not taking a pleasure trip at this time of the season. I would not have
not sitting out to protect your NBA draft stock.
And I wouldn't plan a trip the week of the NCAA tournament. Come on, guys. I want to be right there on that couch, right over there for all of it. But no, it's a work thing. Some of you have seen the stuff in the news about our website. So we will be flying to New York and meeting with
not the Assembly Call, the website that you work
for. The website I work for, the Big Lead. Yeah. So yeah, I will be out. I will be gone from tomorrow through Friday, but I will be back after that.
So you could be back for the second round game because the second round games are played sometime between Thursday and Sunday. Like it's from the 21st to the 25th. So if it's a weekend game,
could be back.
Be there. Awesome.
All right, guys.
As always, thanks for being here, Ryan. It's great to have you. And I promise we won't say anything on Tuesday.
I'm sure you won't. No. Yeah.
We never do that.
Bye, guys.
All right. Coming up on the Assembly Call, it's going to be time for our Big Ten Roundup with Mike DeCourcy, I think. If he's here, we're going to reflect on Indiana's loss to Ohio State and then discuss how the selection committee treated the Big Ten with this year's bracket. Or I'll do my St. Francis preview. You'll have to tune in to find out. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All right. Hello to everybody there on YouTube. Good to see you all. Okay, so I need to see. Mike is not here yet. Do you guys recall? I mean, I'm pretty sure last week we said that we would be on for this week, but I haven't heard from him, and he obviously had a busy weekend. So it is possible that Mike DeCourcy is not going to be here. So I'm going to give it a minute or two, and then I'm going to hop into the St. Francis preview because he's usually here like 7-8 minutes ago. So he's probably not going to be coming. And it was probably a communication error on my part, I have to believe, because Mike is very reliable. So I'm going to put that one on myself. Awesome seeing so many of you guys chatting. I heard props for the Hoosier Hysterics interview with Brian Snow. I continue to be impressed with that show with the Hoosier Hysterics guys. Extremely talented interviewers. I mean, I think those guys really... both with players and in that interview with Brian, I think they do a really good job. I mean, they're slow burns, like it's not a quick half-hour interview. You're going to be in there for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, but I really think they do a good job, and I've really enjoyed what they've brought to just the overall IU content. So, technically they're a competitor, I suppose, because all the IU podcasts are competing for a finite amount of ear share, but, we wouldn't be where we are without people talking about us early on that had their own sites and stuff. So I never really, feel afraid or threatened to talk about other podcasts when they're good. And I think those guys are really, really good. So I would highly recommend subscribing to their show because it's extremely good stuff. Okay, well, let's hop in because I've got some interesting stuff. I didn't think the St. Francis preview was going to be all that interesting. I almost didn't want to do one, but I actually think it's going to be pretty interesting. So we're going to hop into that because I don't think Mike's coming. So Here we go. Let's do this. Alrighty, welcome back to Banner Monday. Each week here in our final segment, we preview Indiana's upcoming opponent for this week. Yes, I said our final segment because I don't think Mike DeCourcy is coming, and I'm going to assume that this was a communication error on my part because Mike, ever since he started joining us on Banner Monday, has been incredibly reliable, always here, on time, when he is supposed to be here. And I also had to send him a new link for Zoom to join. It's possible he didn't get that if he didn't check his Twitter direct messages, so he may actually have been trying to use the other link, although he probably would have direct messaged me if that's the case, so maybe that didn't happen. Either way, I'm chalking this up to myself and probably some kind of communication error on my part because Mike DeCourcy is awesome and professional, and I can't imagine he wouldn't be here for any other reason. So if he comes on, then we'll switch to our Big Ten Roundup. If not, I do have what I think is a pretty interesting preview of this St. Francis game on Tuesday. And so I want to get to some of these things because obviously there are reasons to be optimistic, and this is a game that Indiana should win and should win comfortably, but there are a few things to be concerned about. And so I want to talk about those. First, just, kind of the basics here. Indiana, obviously the number 1 seed, St. Francis, the number 8 seed. They are 261st in KenPom, so not a highly regarded team. Okay, they're out of the Northeast Conference. They tied for the regular season conference title, won it by a tiebreaker. They lost in their conference tournament to Fairleigh Dickinson, and Fairleigh Dickinson actually happens to be the best win they had all season, and Fairleigh Dickinson ranked 208th in the country. So they did, let me pull their profile up here. They did play several big teams in the non-conference. They played Buffalo, they played UCLA, they played North Carolina, they played Virginia Tech. They lost all of those games. None of them were close. In fact, Virginia Tech held them to 37 points and doubled them up. So, when they did play better competition, they didn't fare well. And a big part of that is because, they're a small team. They don't have a lot of size. Even the height that they have, they've got a guy inside who's 6'9", but he's also 195 pounds. So they are not a big team. And so when you're going up against some of the bigger, more athletic teams in the country, it stands to reason that you would have some troubles there. And that is obviously what has happened. And that is going to be Indiana's biggest advantage with the which the Hoosiers absolutely positively must take advantage of and should. And this is why you should have a lot of confidence in this game, because I don't know what kind of answer St. Francis is going to have for Juwan Morgan. I don't know what kind of answer they're going to have for Deron Davis. Those two guys should absolutely feast down low. And frankly, Romeo Langford should as well. I haven't watched film on these guys, so I don't know how good their guards are at keeping perimeter guys out of the lane. But what I do know is that numbers-wise, they are terrible defensively. They are 330th in adjusted defensive efficiency. They are terrible at two-point defense, which at one time was a big strength for Indiana and should be again in this game. So they're not going to block shots. It certainly doesn't seem like they're a team that keeps guys out of the lane if they're giving up that kind of two-point percentage. And so Indiana needs to go back to that advantage. Guys like Al Durham need to not settle for threes and explode to the basket. Same thing with Romeo Langford. And every single possession should run through Deron and Juwan in the post, because those guys will either score, or if St. Francis decides to sell out and try and double those guys, which they'll probably need to do to stop them at all, then there should be open shooters. And Indiana has been a team that is much better in those kind of catch-and-shoot three-point opportunities when the ball goes inside out, as opposed to the pull-up threes or just firing it around the perimeter. So if Indiana comes out with the right mindset, if they're committed to playing offense the way that they should be playing, they should get a good shot pretty much every time down and score 80, 90 points. If it's anything other than that, I think that's a pretty good sign that this team came out with kind of a lackadaisical mindset. And that, to me, if you start looking at keys to victory, no question, undeniably, that's the number one key to victory. Approach the game with a competitive, locked-in mindset. There is not a chance that Archie Miller isn't telling them the exact same things about what they need to be doing offensively. It's just a matter of if they're going to do it. And if they do, they're going to score a ton of points. Okay. So that's the biggest thing. Okay. That's their biggest weakness. That's where Indiana has their biggest advantage. Now, if this is going to be a game, if it's going to be closer than any of us want. Why will that be? Well, the number one reason will be that Indiana just doesn't come out with the right mindset. But even if Indiana doesn't come out with the right mindset, they may still win the game by, 10, 12, 13 points. All right. I'm going to pause right here. We'll get back to this. But there is something that St. Francis does offensively that could give Indiana some trouble. And I will get to that, but Mike DeCourcy is here. And so we're going to bring him on right now and get to our Big Ten segment. Here we go. And Mr. DeCourcy is here, although he's on the phone right now. So he's muted. So what that is 3-point shooting. That is this, that is what St. Francis can do. They're not an elite 3-point shooting team, okay? But they do have 4 guys who can fill it up and can get hot. And when Indiana has had poor performances at home with surprising results, that's what happened. I'm going to dig into those numbers a little bit more here once we're done talking with Mike. But that is definitely something to look at. Mr. DeCourcy.
How are you, Jared? Sorry I was late. Juggling a lot on Selection Monday.
I can imagine. Hey, no problem. I was just delving into a super detailed scouting report on St. Francis, so I have to imagine that all fans are glad that you're here to rescue them from over-analysis on Indiana's first-round NIT matchup. Okay, so how are you handling the aftermath of Selection Sunday? Did you get some sleep? Or are you feeling okay?
Not a lot. I believe I wrote about 5,500 words. This is how it went. Selection show comes up. I do a series of bracket reactions for Big Ten and beyond. I get in a cab. I go to Chipotle. I shove 2 tacos in my mouth. I walk to my hotel. I change into some pajamas, and then I sit on the couch and I write 5,500 words. And honestly, I would have stopped at about 4,400 or so, just do my region breakdowns. And I had the column on Michigan State and the absurdity of their bracket placement in my head, and I thought, maybe I won't write it. And then I went on Twitter for a moment, and I saw Bernard Muir, the athletic director at Cincinnati, at Stanford, and the chairman of the committee, his reasoning on why they were placed there. And I'm like, oh man, you're making me do this, aren't you? You're going to make me stay up another hour and write this, because it was so ridiculous for them to say that they don't pay attention to matchups. They pay attention to getting you closest to home. Well, why don't we have 8, 10 travel agents in there instead of people who are purporting to spend the entire winter studying teams for the sake of putting together the best possible NCAA tournament? Why don't we just have 10 travel agents? I mean, because that's what they're saying, that it's all about close to home. And it's not even, let's be realistic. Washington, D.C. is not close to Michigan. It's just another place you have to travel to. We're talking about a literal difference of 120 miles. 120 miles difference between going to D.C. and going to KC. I looked it up. Basically, no difference in airfare for that weekend from East Lansing to KC, East Lansing to DC. And if you think about it, if you drive, it would probably take ordinarily another hour and 45 minutes to get to KC as opposed to DC. But those of us who've driven to or through DC can tell you there's an hour and a half worth of traffic waiting for you when you get there. So it's basically the same. Mm-hmm. What they've done is a crime against logic. There's no logical reason to seed the teams 1 to 68 and then tell us, forget what we're telling you because 120 miles means more than which is the most reasonable matchup.
I think everybody listening to this is going to agree with you because, and for anybody who doesn't know or hasn't been paying attention, it put Michigan State with Duke. Duke was the number 1 overall seed. Michigan State supposedly the number 1-2 seed, but now they get kind of that unfavorable draw because of supposedly saving on travel, which I suppose, like, if everybody was hitchhiking, or I saw someone tweet, if people were going by horse and buggy, maybe yes, that would be a little bit more reasonable. But in modern day travel, really not that big of a deal, as you said.
The funny thing, that was tweeted to me, and I retweeted it because, like, I got like 4 great lines thrown at me. And I'm like, hey, I was up at like 2:00 in the morning last night. Where were you people? You could have written this thing for me.
So I do want to talk a little bit about Indiana's performance against Ohio State. I know you have to go way back in your mind to probably remember that fantastic game, but we'll save that for the end. But sticking with that topic, I mean, Michigan State, it seems kind of got the short end of the stick. Do you feel like the Big Ten was disrespected a little bit in terms of how the seeding went? Teams like Indiana not getting in. Like, do you get any of that, or do you think that the Big Ten was treated fairly by the selection committee overall?
I honestly think if you look at the seedings, that I don't think that they were treated badly. First of all, they got more teams in the field than any other conference. They deserved more teams, but they got them. I don't see a major difference with anybody's seeding. You could say, okay, Michigan, and it does make a huge difference, because if Michigan State had been the number 1-2 seed as opposed to Tennessee, then they would be in Louisville as opposed to DC, where Duke is, because again, geographic preference. And actually, although that's not an easy drive, it's drivable. I mean, I believe that would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 hours from East Lansing to Louisville. And I've driven from Cincinnati to East Lansing. It took me 4.5, and Louisville's another 90 minutes to 2 hours down the road south. So it's doable. And so why were they behind Tennessee? Well, it came down to this. Even though Tennessee won no championships and lost 2 games in which they could have clinched championships, and Michigan State won 2 championships and won the games in which they could clinch those 2 championships, didn't back into anything. They emphasized Michigan State's bad losses or non-field losses, because I think it's harsh to call Indiana a bad loss, but it is a non-field loss. I don't believe Tennessee had any of those, and I think they emphasized that more. It's different flavors of ice cream. Okay, fine, but that's why the emphasis on geography is so preposterous, because the difference in those 2 things, Louisville versus DC, Virginia versus Duke. Is Virginia great? Yes. Do you have to deal with 2 lottery picks? The first 2 guys that are going to go in the draft, the best college basketball player of this season, maybe of the last 5 or 6? Not at Virginia, you don't. So that's why that emphasis on geography is so preposterous, because it compounds that decision-making process. Very close call here becomes a very enormous penalty. And as well, Michigan, which lost those 2 championship games to Michigan State, winds up with a reward. Do they have to get on a plane and sit there for 3.5 hours? Yeah. But they also get to go out west, where the team that has played the least demanding competition over the course of the last 2 months awaits in their first game. And whether or not you think Gonzaga is better than the committee says, this is what the committee says. They say Gonzaga is less than Carolina, Virginia, and Duke. So the logic would say that would be the matchup you'd want. And instead, that becomes the reward for, and this is a harsh word, failing twice in the biggest games.
As you look at the Big Ten teams that made the tournament and their draws, how many Big Ten teams do you expect to still be there on the second weekend of the tournament?
I know, I expect 4. I mean, I picked 4. I expect 3. One of mine that I have surviving is Maryland. That's based on a lack of trust in the other teams in their region. I don't trust Maryland a whole lot more than I trust them. I trust Maryland with Anthony Cowan playing an engaged brand of basketball a lot, but I haven't seen that in a while. So I have them beating LSU because everybody knows what their circumstance is.
Yeah,
I just not buying them. And then I have Michigan. I have Michigan going a ways. I have Michigan State going a ways, but then running into Duke, unfortunately. And then I have Purdue. I have them in the Elite Eight, and I think they'd be an interesting matchup with Virginia. I'm not thrilled about the matchups, the teams that were placed in the South region. That's the region that's closest to my home, so that's where I'm going to go. Not thrilled with that, but if I can get Purdue versus Virginia, I can get excited about that.
Purdue is going to be such an interesting case because, I mean, if Carson Edwards gets hot, they could pretty much beat anybody, but he could shoot them right out of their first round game if he's not careful. So I mean, they're going to be a really interesting case, I think, to watch in this tournament.
I will be very interested to see if Matt coaches him differently in those games. I mean, it's given him a lot of free reign, and I understand why, because they're trying to get him back. They won a conference championship even with him not shooting the basketball well, almost with only a few exceptions in the final 10, 11 games.
Yeah,
they were 8-2 down the stretch, and I think probably he had maybe 2 good games in that stretch. Others, in terms of shooting the basketball, he did other things, but in terms of shooting the basketball, he had 8 and 9 really difficult games. I wonder if the direction will be stronger when any loss could mean the end of your season.
I want to ask you about Michigan State, because Indiana dealt with a lot of injuries this year, and it was a big topic of conversation, obviously, and for good reason. But it's interesting that we just saw Michigan State win the Big Ten regular season and tournament titles despite significant injuries to 2 of its 3 most talented and experienced players in Joshua Langford and Nick Ward. And I'm wondering what lesson, if any, we should take from this and how they handled this season, besides that it's good to have a Hall of Fame coach and All-American point guard to kind of hold it all together, because that's the obvious lesson, right? But is there anything else? Is there anything else that Michigan State did, adjustments that they made that really helped them weather these injuries that maybe a team like Indiana could have made when they were going through their injury issues?
Honestly, I think that the lesson is be deep. I mean, that's kind of, because think about it. Okay, so you lose Langford. Well, now you have Kyle Arns. Okay, you lose Arns. Now you have Aaron Henry. So you lose Nick Ward. Xavier Tillman actually makes you better. I mean, when Nick Ward went out, they became a better basketball team. They would not have won the championship, I believe, if Nick Ward were their starting center in the clutch games that they won. I don't believe they would have. They weren't as good defensively without him. What he gave them on offense, I don't think made up for it. I do think that as a complement now, a very physical player who can deal with other physical players, a guy who can still go into the low post and back you down and get a bucket, depending on the matchup, a guy who can run the floor, which I didn't see enough in Chicago. I think that's something he still can add. So he can make you better. But Xavier Tillman is an excellent defender. Doesn't do anything he can't do, really fights for offensive rebounds. And when he gets the ball down low, really fights to score. Doesn't relent mentally. You see guys, big guys, they're down low. They got the ball. There's a guy with them. They can't shake him. They give up. They throw it, they basically make the move. It's like, whatever happens, happens. We'll live with it. He doesn't do that. He's either making the decision of how he can get the guy up and get fouled, or how he can get past him, or he's giving up on the ball. He's passing out and doing something and starting over again. A lot of big guys are so determined once they get that ball deep, it's going up regardless, that it winds up getting swatted back, or they wind up forcing the ball through what they think is going to be a block, and they wind up going long. Xavier Tillman does not do that. He doesn't make that mistake. And that's a huge difference in their team.
So let's talk about Indiana and their performance against Ohio State, which a lot of people kind of looked at as a play-out game. It certainly went that way, as Ohio State made it, Indiana didn't. The irony, as we talked about earlier, is given the selection committee's apparent criteria, if Indiana just hadn't played that game and it ended with 14 losses, they might have gotten in the tournament, given how they were looking at it. But that was just a weird game. I mean, Indiana didn't come out and play very well early. I thought Ohio State's maturity and toughness really bothered Indiana. And then, Devontae Green went nuclear there at the end and kind of made it a game. What were your takeaways from that performance by Indiana?
I knew within the first, I'm going to say, just so I'm not exaggerating, I'll say within the first 5 minutes, because I think I knew quicker than that. But just so I make sure that I'm encapsulating, I did not see the level of compete in that game, in those first 5 minutes, that I had in the 3-4 previous games that they won. They were a thoroughly different team. They were the team that we had seen too often in January and February. And it was really disappointing to see. I was just flabbergasted watching it. I thought they were done being that team. And I thought the Rutgers game was such an emphatic statement. We really want this. Mm-hmm. We really want this. We're going for this. And then to come out against Ohio State, and like if they had played hard and smart for 10 minutes, and Ohio State was just so good and so together and so difficult to penetrate, and they gave up mentally at that point, maybe I could understand it. They gave up mentally within the first, like I said, within the first 5 minutes. I saw plays that suggested to me, indicated to me that they didn't want to be there. And I was knocked back. I'm still astonished at what I saw, because I thought that was gone from that team. And it's frustrating for the coaches going to the offseason now, because they know that the problems that existed for much of the season and that seemed to be eradicated when they got to the stretch run and beat Wisconsin, and played so wonderfully against Illinois and Rutgers. And obviously they pulled out the second Michigan State game to get the sweep. I think they thought that maybe they were making progress there. And now they know that they're not all the way there. And now they have to decide, how do we get this team? How do we get particular players to buy in? And how will we know if it can turn that quickly? That's a real problem for them going forward, because they have a lot of good components coming back. They have a lot of good components coming in, and they're going to have to decide how to make sure that that their roster is cohesive and productive going into next year, because you don't want a repeat of the kinds of issues that you had throughout 2018-19.
To what do you attribute what you saw in that first half against Ohio State? Because I think you're relying on a backcourt of two freshmen and a sophomore against a very experienced Ohio State backcourt. And I thought I agree with you. From early on, you could tell that Rob Finney, Romeo Langford, they're very talented players, but they haven't developed that tough-mindedness that Keyshawn Woods and C.J. Jackson have. And they just kind of took us out of what we wanted to do, and all the careless turnovers. There was certainly a lack of focus for whatever reason. But do you attribute it to the inconsistencies of a young team and facing a very mature team, or do you think it's something deeper than that?
No, I think it's deeper than that. I think that there's I think that within particular players there is a lack of buy-in, for lack of a better term. It just isn't there, and it hasn't been there for the greater majority of the time that season went on. And I don't know how you deal with that. I think you have to make your decision about moving forward and try to be emphatic with those particular guys that you got to be on board, or we can't move forward. But the conundrum for Indiana is that I don't think they can have enough functional bodies if one or two of those guys that you're having trouble with decide that you're more trouble than you're worth. So it's a real predicament. And I don't know exactly how one deals with that. So in a lot of places they would go out and they would recruit 8 guys and just turn it over. Obviously that's not the way Indiana wants to do business. It's not the kind of program they want to be. It's not typical of the Big Ten. It's not typical of the kind of program prestige that Indiana carries. So the challenge is you have to try to find a way to reach the players you have. And that's been an issue throughout 2018-19, and that will linger into the offseason until we get back and start doing this all over again.
Now, you've mentioned the offseason a couple of times. It does feel like the offseason is here, but the Hoosiers do have some NIT games coming up. Now, I'm guessing you haven't given the NIT much thought since the selection show.
I will admit that it's funny. I know that it's really big for the beat writers that cover those teams to have to be on top of that. I only ever had to cover the NIT once. And it's a great story because the coach of the team I was covering, Paul Evans at that point at Pittsburgh, was getting a lot of heat. And they got shipped to Penn State to play a NIT first round game. And it was kind of one of those games you felt like it was a trap, that if they went up and got smoked at Penn State, that people might start trying to make a move on Evans. And I didn't want that because I didn't want to have to cover a coaching search. And I liked Paul. So they went up and they beat Penn State. Okay, that's good. So then they get a second round home game against Florida on Monday of Sweet 16 week. And if they win that game, then they're going to Purdue. I am scheduled to leave for the East region on Wednesday, the day they would be scheduled to go to Purdue. So now, back in my mind, I need them to lose that game. But it can't be ugly because that stuff might start again and they might have to cover coaching search and I'm still going to have my week screwed up. So they play, it goes back and forth, back and forth. I think they're down 75, 73 or 76, 73, something like that. Sean Miller, now the coach at Arizona, brings the ball down. He's the pit point guard, gets it to around midcourt. Buzzer's about ready to go. I think it was a legit three, so he made it taken from 35 feet, something like that. It may have been a little further out. Can't remember exactly. Ball hits off the back of the rim, bounces away. Game's over. I don't have to go to Purdue. So I get in the car next day, drive to Philly. 3 days later, I'm sitting courtside when Christian Laettner makes that shot.
Wow.
So if Sean Miller had made his, I may have missed the Laettner shot. So
Wow.
that was the best. That's the best best experience anybody's ever had in the NIT, bar none.
Well, let me ask you this about the opportunity that Indiana has, because obviously last year Penn State was in the NIT. They were very disappointed to not, make the NCAA tournament. They end up winning the thing, and you often hear, hey, you can build momentum into next season, springboard you into next year. Penn State, starts off this year with a thud. Obviously, they had a good non-conference win against Virginia Tech, but then they lose their first 10 games before surging at the end and actually finishing higher than Indiana in KenPom. How important do you think that it could be for Indiana to make a run, and how destructive could it be if they end with a whimper, or is that kind of already baked into this season and it wouldn't make that much of a difference at this point?
Yeah, they have a chance to change their narrative. And the difference between them and Penn State is if Tony Carr had decided to return to Penn State, their season this year might have been different. It certainly would have been different. It might have been more successful. And certainly the momentum they carried out of last year's NIT would have been more impactful. When you lose a key player like that, okay, they return the front court, but then there was no connector there.
Yeah.
And so the ball, where the ball starts, is the most important part of the team. And they lost that. And so it didn't really matter what they did a year ago. They had to start all over again in the backcourt. And I think they started in the wrong place. Jamari Wheeler, as a starter by the end of the year, they were a better basketball team. And Rasheer Bolton, coming off the bench, gave them a real dynamic pop. And they'd hit on that earlier, might have been a different season. But Indiana has Robert Finney back next year. They have Al Durham back next year. They have Devontae Green back next year. They won't have Romeo, but they have a lot of guys back that can make difference. And they get a chance maybe to use Race Thompson a little bit more in this deal than they were before. Play St. Francis, you got to be able to get Race Thompson on the floor for some minutes for that one, that kind of thing. So they can make some progress with what they have. They can make progress in the practices that they'll have for as long as they last in this event. And I do think that they have an opportunity to build where the Penn State's experience wound up being a good one in terms of being able to, win some games, have some fun, go to the Garden, all that. But it wasn't productive for them moving forward.
Last question for you. We've heard a lot of talk since the selection show about the impact of the 20-game schedule on the Big Ten and how it might have been a hindrance when it came to, certain teams like Indiana, maybe, having an opportunity to get a couple more wins if they don't have those two Big Ten games. Your thoughts on that? Has anything changed about your thoughts on the 20-game schedule?
I don't think it hurt. I really don't. Indiana could have got more wins, maybe had a little bit more room between them and the bubble. I mean, them in 500. But they were 12-2 in non-league. I think that all they had to do really was play better against teams that they were capable of beating.
No.
It didn't hurt Michigan State. The timing of the conference final didn't hurt Michigan State. Do I think that they lost to Indiana and Illinois because they played 20 games instead of 18? No, I just don't think they played very well in those games. I don't think they got more guys hurt because of that. They got because Josh got hurt in non-league during the non-league season. So more leagues will play 20 next year. I know ACC is going to that, and that so it probably at least will even things out a little bit. You got a lot of challenges you're in, good or bad. I don't know. Because that, you got 20 league games. Now you're up to 22 high majors, or if you're in both Gavin and ACC, it really does start to pile up on you. You play an MTE, and if you get 2 high majors there, now you're up to 24. I remember going back to Pitt that year I was talking about, and I believe when they got done, they played 31 games, and 27 were against what would be the equivalent of high majors. That team was completely wrung out. These guys aren't pros. You kind of need to be able to take a break against some St. Francis's, for lack of a better term. Yeah. So I do think that they have to watch what kind of games they schedule non-conference. You have to be very careful when you're in the 20-game universe.
Or we need Rutgers to go back to being the old Rutgers.
Who
told them they could be top 75?
That would be helpful for everybody else, but not so helpful for Rutgers. I don't think you're seeing that. You got a point guard coming in next year people like.
You got a good coach. Got a good coach, man.
Very good coach.
Okay, full disclosure. Will you watch Indiana St. Francis on Tuesday night? It's Tuesday night. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock Eastern.
I would suspect that what I will do is that I will DVR it and I will watch it as I work out on Wednesday morning. That's my suspicion.
Oh, that's good. Okay. So we can ask you questions about it next week.
Absolutely.
Okay. Very good. Well, Mike, I appreciate you being here, especially after quite the busy schedule. It's always great getting your insight, and we look forward to talking with you more as both tournaments come through. We have 2 tournaments to talk about now.
Absolutely.
How fun.
All right.
Well, thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Mike. All right. The great Mike DeCourcy, our weekly Big Ten Roundup. So glad that he was able to join us this week. All right. I can get back to what I was talking about with St. Francis. I know that you've just been on pins and needles to hear more about this St. Francis preview, but I do have just a couple of other things that I want to say. We talked about keys to victory, approaching the game with a competitive, locked-in mindset, attack the paint because they are terrible, one of the worst in the country at defending twos, so don't settle for outside shots. Here's the reason why this game is going to be closer than it should be is that St. Francis gets hot from the three-point line, all right? They have 4 guys, all right, Wolford, Blackman, King, and Braxton, that shoot 33% or better on a high volume of attempts. Think 3 or more attempts per game, all right? If you look at their biggest win of the year against Fairleigh Dickinson, they went 12 of 25 from 3. Those 4 guys were 10 of 18. Their last game against Fairleigh Dickinson in the tournament, they lost it, but those guys went 12 of 23 from downtown. Well, overall, they were 12 of 23. Those 4 guys were 10 of 20. All right, so their offensive two-point percentage is 46.8%. It's 296th. They are not a team that is going to score a lot at the rim. I told you they've got the center that's 6'9", 195 pounds. Their power forward, he's a good player. I think that's Braxton. He leads them in scoring, leads them in rebounding, but he's 6'5", 208. All right, so he's not a big guy. We should be able to defend them inside. All right, but my fear, if I have any fear about this game, it's if we're not locked in defensively, the one thing that we have seen is we can be a little leaky in terms of defending the three-point line. Now, you're not going to see that in the overall numbers. Indiana's three-point defense for the year, very good. It was top 100. All right, in terms of allowing attempts, we were right there middle of the pack. And toward the end of the season, we were really good defending the 3. But you think back to the Minnesota game, you think back to some other performances, we're susceptible every now and then to just being leaky around there. And so if that happens, and if they get hot, and, you get that weird energy in Assembly Hall, I don't need to remind you of recent games where that's happened. That's my only fear, because they do bring in guys who aren't afraid to shoot it. And none of them are lights out shooters. None of them are 40%. Wolford is 36.9%. That's the highest. But that's my only fear. So we've really got to be locked in. The guards are going to have to, obviously stick with their guys. Our rotations need to be on point. No late closeouts, no lazy closeouts. Really make them put it on the floor. I mean, I say overplay them on the three-point line. Run them off the three-point line. Trust your help defense. Trust the fact that they're just not great finishers at the rim. And, even a guy like Race Thompson in a game like this can be a rim protector because he's not huge, but he's bigger than the guys that they have and tougher than the guys that they have. So that's a key. Pay attention to detail. Stay connected on the three-point line because that's the one place where if this St. Francis team gets hot, they could do some damage. Now, they didn't shoot the three particularly well those 4 games against good teams that I told you about in the non-conference schedule. They didn't shoot particularly well in those games, so I'm guessing that, major conference length and athleticism probably bothers those guys a lot on the perimeter, but still, they're shooters. They can shoot them. We've got to make sure that we're connected on that end of the court. The other thing to think about, and this has been a key for this team all year, is just avoid silly foul trouble. They do have 3 guys who draw 4.5 or more fouls per 40 minutes. Now, that number is not adjusted, so that's, in their own conference, they're drawing those fouls. It's going to be a little bit different at Indiana, and against our size. But, that's an issue. Braxton, the guy I told you about earlier, he's not a big guy, but he does draw contact. So, guys like Juwan Morgan, especially early in the game, again, why we need to be locked in and attentive, don't want to pick up any early fouls, because you don't want a guy like Juwan Morgan to have to sit. You don't want to, allow St. Francis to just build some momentum, get some easy points from the free throw line. Make them make shots, run them off the line. And then make them try to drive on you and make shots and defend them well because they're not going to make a living there. So if Indiana does that and just plays solid defense, again, this is a game they're favored by about 20. I think the Ken Pom prediction, 82-62. That's how this game should go. It'll just depend on which Indiana team shows up. Hopefully it's the one that's locked in and ready to go. And if so, we will move on and go on to the second round to face Providence or Arkansas. And in case you didn't hear, we mentioned it earlier, Daniel Gafford of Arkansas is not going to play in the NIT as he starts to prepare for his professional career. So if Arkansas does win that game, Gafford is the guy who killed us more than any other in that Arkansas game. He wouldn't be there. But let's take care of business against St. Francis first. Hopefully the Hoosiers do that. And then we'll have another game to talk about afterwards. All right, well, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Banner Monday. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Monday afternoons as long as the season is still going for the live broadcast of our Banner Monday recording. And you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Thank you for listening. We'll be back to talk with you Tuesday night after IU St. Francis. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. And go Hoosiers.
All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you.
All right. There we go. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Glad Mike was able to pop in and that we were able to get that segment going there. I'm going to go get the podcast up. We'll see you guys all on Tuesday night. Hopefully it's a nice, comfortable post-game show talking about a good Indiana performance and not something crazy. I'll talk to you guys all tomorrow night.